She looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You're too controlling." While her phone lit up with a message, she flipped over too fast, like I wasn't supposed to see that name. And I didn't say a single word because something in me already felt finished, like the ending had been written before I even walked in the room. But I still needed to hear her say it out loud to believe it. Why did that message feel like a second conversation happening right in front of me? I just stood there holding my keys, noticing how calm she was compared to the way my chest was tightening, like she had rehearsed this moment and I had walked in late to my own breakup. But the weird part wasn't her accusation. It was the silence between us that felt like it had teeth, waiting for one of us to bleed first. And I couldn't tell if I was the problem or already replaced. What wasn't she saying in that silence? Then she added, almost casually, "I think you should leave," like she was talking about returning something to a store instead of ending years of shared life. And that's when I realized I wasn't fighting anymore. I was calculating, watching her face for cracks she wasn't giving me. What had changed in her before I even got home? I remember the first time I thought something was off. It wasn't dramatic, just small gaps in her attention, like she was present but never fully there, answering texts too quickly, or stepping out of the room like her phone needed privacy more than we did. But I told myself that's just life now, right? Everyone's distracted in this country. Everyone's overworked. Everyone's half gone already. But why did it feel like she was leaving pieces of herself somewhere else I wasn't allowed to follow? We lived in a suburban apartment outside Dallas. Nothing fancy, just normal American life. Rent due dates, grocery runs, late-night Netflix we barely finished. But even in that normalcy, I started noticing how she'd angle her screen away when I entered the room, like instinctively protecting something I hadn't been told existed yet. And I wondered, what kind of secret becomes muscle memory like that? I wasn't a perfect husband. I know that. I asked questions. I checked in too much. I wanted clarity where she wanted space. And maybe that's what she meant by controlling. But I always thought communication was supposed to protect a marriage, not break it apart slowly from the inside. So when did honesty become the thing pushing us away instead of keeping us together? That night, she didn't argue, didn't defend, just kept repeating how tired she was of feeling watched. And I sat there thinking about every moment I tried to fix things that weren't visibly broken yet. But maybe I was fixing the wrong problem the whole time. What problem had I never actually seen? The next week, everything became strangely polite, like we were co-workers sharing a break room instead of a married couple sharing a bed. And she started staying late with friends more often, friends I realized I barely knew, names she mentioned casually, but never in detail, like they were placeholders for something else entirely. And I couldn't help wondering why her world suddenly had so many doors I wasn't allowed to open. I started noticing patterns I didn't want to notice. Her phone always face down, bathroom trips that lasted longer than necessary, a new password. She typed faster than she used to, like she was protecting reflexively now, not consciously anymore. And I asked myself if trust was supposed to feel this heavy when it started breaking. One night, I asked her carefully, "Are we okay?" And she laughed, not cruelly, but like the question itself was outdated, like I was speaking a language she had already stopped using. And that laugh stayed with me longer than her answer, because it sounded like distance disguised as familiarity. How do you come back from being emotionally untranslated? Then came the silence phase, where she stopped explaining anything at all, just existing beside me like a guest in her own life. And I filled in the gaps with worst-case scenarios I told myself were paranoia. But paranoia doesn't usually feel this specific, this targeted, this personal. What was I actually picking up on that I refused to name? I found it by accident, or maybe not accident. Maybe my hands already knew before my mind accepted it. When her phone buzzed in the kitchen and the name on the screen wasn't anyone I recognized, but the tone of the messages wasn't casual. It was intimate in a way that made my stomach drop before I even read the first full sentence. And suddenly, every late night started rearranging itself in my head. What did I ignore that was never actually small? The messages weren't just conversations. They were continuity, inside jokes I wasn't part of, plans that didn't include me. And the worst part wasn't even the betrayal itself. It was how comfortable it sounded, like this life had been going on parallel to ours for a while now, and I was the one who arrived late to both versions of her. How long had I been living in the edited version of our marriage? I didn't confront her immediately. I just stood there in the kitchen, holding her phone like it weighed more than it should, listening to her laugh in the other room, a sound I used to think I knew completely, now feeling like it belonged to someone I hadn't met yet. And I wondered, was this the first time I actually saw her clearly? When she walked back in and saw my face, she didn't ask what I saw. She already knew I had crossed a line she had been quietly building for months, and instead of denial, she just said, "You always make everything about control," like that explained everything else away. What else had she already justified before this moment? That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat in the living room replaying every conversation, every delay, every shift in tone, like my mind was trying to rebuild a timeline that could explain how I missed something so obvious. But the more I thought, the more I realized I wasn't missing pieces. I was ignoring patterns I didn't want to accept. How do you grieve something that's still physically sitting across from you? She came out around 2 a.m., calm, almost rehearsed again, saying we needed space. Like space wasn't already what had been growing between us for months. And I laughed once without meaning to, because the irony felt almost insulting at that point. Like we were both participating in a breakup we refused to name properly. What happens when two people stop arguing and start erasing each other instead? I asked her if there was someone else, and she didn't answer right away. And that pause said more than any confession could, because it wasn't shock. It was calculation, deciding how much truth I deserved. And that's when I realized I wasn't part of her decision-making anymore. When did I stop being included in her honesty? She finally said, "Doesn't matter." And that sentence hit harder than denial would have, because it confirmed everything without admitting anything. And I felt something in me detach quietly, not explosively, just a slow internal disconnection I couldn't reverse. What do you do when closure is deliberately withheld? The next morning, I packed a bag. Not dramatically, not angrily, just efficiently, like my body had already accepted what my emotions were still arguing about. And I noticed how she watched me without stopping me, like she was observing a decision she had already influenced but didn't need to finish herself. And that felt worse than any argument. Why didn't she try to keep me? Before I left, I asked her one last time if she ever even loved me the way I thought she did, and she hesitated just long enough to break something permanently, then said she did at some point, which somehow confirmed that love had become past tense without my permission. And I walked out before I could ask when that point ended. How do you pinpoint the exact day you stopped being chosen? But the real twist came 2 days later when a mutual friend called me, confused, saying she had been seen with someone I actually knew, someone from my circle, someone who had been in our home, laughing at our table, shaking my hand like nothing was wrong. And suddenly the betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was embedded in my life in ways I hadn't even questioned yet. How many layers deep did this go? That's when I realized I wasn't just replaced, I was surrounded by it before I ever had a chance to notice. And the scariest part wasn't the cheating itself, it was how normal everyone else seemed to think it was. What kind of reality had I been living in without realizing it? Weeks passed, and I heard pieces of her life through other people, how things didn't last with him, how trust issues followed her too, how the same patterns she blamed me for started resurfacing elsewhere, like you can't escape the habits you used to justify hurting someone else. And I didn't feel victory, just distance. What does justice even feel like when it doesn't heal anything? I moved into a smaller place across town, started rebuilding routines that didn't include checking anyone's location or reading between lines. And for the first time in a long time, silence didn't feel suspicious. It just felt empty in a neutral way, like space that didn't belong to confusion anymore. And I wondered why peace feels unfamiliar after chaos. One evening, I got a message from her, short, vague, saying she misunderstood a lot of things. But there was no apology in it, just reflection too late to matter, and I didn't reply because I finally understood something important. Answers don't always fix what questions destroyed. Why did closure feel less like relief and more like irrelevance? Now, when I think about it, I don't replay the betrayal as much as I replay the moment I stopped reacting, because that's when everything actually changed. Not when she left emotionally, but when I finally stopped trying to chase what was already gone. And I still wonder if silence is what saved me, or what ended me differently. What does it mean when your own calm feels unfamiliar? Sometimes I catch myself almost asking questions I already know the answers to, like my mind still expects closure from someone who never intended to give it. And I realize healing isn't loud. It's just the slow acceptance that some people rewrite your reality and never look back to see what they broke. So was I ever in control of the story at all? And the strange part is, I don't hate her anymore, but I also don't recognize who I was in that relationship. Like that version of me belonged to a different timeline I can't return to, and that makes me wonder what version of myself she still thinks she knows. What story is she telling now?